What's happening, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I have a great show lined up for you today. Going to go over my defensive grades in just a moment. There were a bunch of news and notes that we need to cover, but I want to start off with one of the hot topics of Monday, and that was A.J. Dillon's draft status. Of course, there are still some of those who are talking about A.J. Dillon maybe not being the smartest pick in the second round and maybe not spending a second round pick on a running back like A.J. Dillon and so on and so forth. I think it was Pro Football Focus that was kind of bringing up that argument again. And I wanted to kind of touch base on that first because it is a hot topic and it is an interesting debate conversation and, sort of draft value sort of thing. So let's just jump into it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I do think it's funny that I think we can sort of lose track of the fact that at the end of the day, your goal in the draft is to find good football players that can help your team win football games. I don't think Green Bay or Brian Gutekunst is losing any sleep over the fact that they drafted A.J. Dillon at the end of the second round. Now, if we rewind to 2020 and that draft, I do think that you can question Green Bay's overall positional value, drafting basically a backup sort of lottery ticket quarterback in the first round, power running back in the second round, and then H-back / maybe tight end in the third round in Josiah DeGuara. I think you can make an argument that maybe that's not the best general use of your resources. And certainly the jury is still out on Josiah DeGuara and certainly on Jordan Love as well. And I think, fifth round pick Kamal Martin obviously didn't work out very well. So this draft in and of itself is going to be something that, Brian Gutekunst will be evaluated on for a very long time for a variety of different reasons. And of all of the picks in that draft, other than maybe John Runyon, who looks like a very good sixth round pick, I think A.J. Dillon is probably the one that they are least concerned about or least worried about. And I do think, again, that we get carried away a little bit in the fact of like, well, what could you have gotten? The draft is the ultimate mystery box, right? The old Family Guy episode, why would you select a boat when you could grab the mystery box? The mystery box could even be a boat. Like, that's what draft picks are sometimes. Like, yeah, you could, maybe have selected a different position and hit a home run at another position, but if you found a really good running back at the end of the second round, and one of the things that I really want to emphasize there is the end of the second round. I think we get caught up in this idea of like second round picks need to be spent on these premium positions only. Well, when you're picking at the end of the second round, that's basically like a third round pick, right? And I think right around the beginning of the third round is beginning to middle of third round is where you'd expect to pick a player like A.J. Dillon. So if they didn't have a bunch of players that they loved left on their board and they decided to go, a quote unquote power running back at the end of the second, rather than, maybe trying to trade down and get him a few picks later, so be it. They liked him. They decided to get him and they thought he could be, surprise, surprise, an all-around running back. And that's exactly what he's become. And I don't hate the value of an all-around, all-purpose running back at the end of round two. I just don't. And one of the key reasons as to why is because you get a really good running back 4 years on a very cheap deal and you don't have to pump money into that position. Now, we could make another argument and another debate of, well, you paid Aaron Jones money, so now you've pumped in a bunch of money to Aaron Jones and a premium draft pick in A.J. Dillon. Is that the best use of resources? And again, we could have this debate forever. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I don't hate a end of second round, all around, all purpose running back that's turned into what A.J. Dillon is, who can be a 4-year back on a super cheap deal. There's a lot of value in that. And I think we're already seeing that value for Green Bay. Can I understand the argument of maybe that's not the best positional value at that selection? Sure, maybe. But at the end of the day, again, very clearly, very succinctly, your job as a GM is to draft good football players that can help your team win. A.J. Dillon is that, and we are not going to have an argument when there are 5 players from the first round of that draft that are no longer on their team. So, yeah, if Green Bay's most egregious error in this draft is drafting A.J. Dillon in the second round and not getting good positional value, so be it. Once again, I don't think Green Bay is going to be losing any sleep over that. So Good pick by Brian Gutekunst. I think most people are very satisfied and happy that A.J. Dillon is a Green Bay Packer, and it certainly seems like he is just beginning to hit his stride, and we are going to very much see what A.J. Dillon is capable of these next couple weeks in all likelihood without Aaron Jones going against the Minnesota Vikings and the LA Rams. So that should be fun to watch. I can't wait to see Dillon in a starting role. We saw it last year against Tennessee, and it went incredibly well. So we shall see what that brings these next couple weeks against two very tough opponents and two games that Green Bay's going to very much want to get out of those games with a win in any way, shape, or form. And A.J. Dillon will be a huge part in that. Now let's jump to news and notes really quick. Blake Bortles is released. Pour one out. The Bortles era is over in Green Bay, ending with a 1-1 record. I think we have to question the coaching in this scenario. If you have Blake Bortles on your team and can only muster a 500 record when he is on your team, you are not doing your job as an organization. I say completely in jest. But Bortles' era comes to an end. He's active one game and they lose. He is inactive this past game, or just a practice squad member this past game, I should say. But Kurt Benkert is back, ready to take the reins as the number 3 quarterback. So Blake Bortles is no longer on the roster. We will all somehow find a way to move on. But I think the good news here is that Kurt Benkert is back and ready to be the practice squad quarterback, the number 3 quarterback, and so on and so forth, which I think, again, most people will be very happy about. And most importantly, it sounds like Benkert is healthy and ready to go. I asked him on Twitter, I posted on Twitter that if we don't get a Kurt Benkert video like we did Russell Wilson coming back, then what even are we doing? Unfortunately, he didn't bite. He did respond saying, didn't think it was going to happen, but I would love to see the Kurt Benkert return video a la what Russell Wilson did a week ago. Let's jump to the injury list. We got some good news, some bad news on the injury front. Let's start with the bad news. Sort of as expected, and as we kind of discussed yesterday, Whitney Mercilus, torn bicep, out for the remainder of the season. Very likely could have played his last down in Green Bay. Didn't get to play a ton, unfortunately. Really a big bummer because I would have loved to have seen a full edge rusher group with Za'Darius eventually, hopefully, and Preston and Gary and Mercilus. I think that's an amazing group of 4 edge rushers that you can rotate in a variety of different ways. But that's it for Whitney Mercilus, and it's unfortunate. I think he was a little bit of a bonus coming over from Houston. I don't think that's something that, a player like him that Green Bay could have banked on becoming available and signing with the team, but Brian Gutekunst did a great job in getting him to Green Bay, but unfortunately, he will not be able to play the remainder of this season. And then to sort of make matters worse, but also in somewhat of good news, for making matters worse, Rashaan Gary, also an edge rusher, also may miss some time. But the good news is hyperextended elbow. Doesn't seem like there's going to be any damage. It sounds like Rashaan wants to try to brace up and play this week. It sounds like they're going to take it, a little by little and kind of see how he's doing. No real determinations yet from the Packers as to what, they're going to do with Gary or anything like that. But it sounds like Green Bay dodged a bullet. Watch the all-22 version. Basically, without getting graphic, his arm got, he came around the corner to make a play and his arm got pinned under the pile as he's basically flying across the field and his body's going one way and his arm's pinned the other way. And you can see a very real hyperextension taking place. And thankfully, it wasn't anything worse because it looked like it could have been something very gnarly, very easily in that situation. And to only come away with a hyperextended elbow or whatever it was, pretty good news for Green Bay. And it sounds like there's a chance Gary could still play this week. We'll see if that's the case and if he's the same. I think that's one thing that we always forget as we are, thinking of like, well, the good news, Gary's going to play this week. Well, if he's not capable of using his arm the way that he normally would, and that affects his game, and he's nowhere near the same pass rusher, well, it's great that he's out there. But if if he's the equivalent of Jonathan Garvin, it doesn't help you all that much, right? So we'll see, again, A, can he play? And B, if he does play, just how effective can he be? But I think the good news is it doesn't seem like it's anything too serious that's going to knock him out for the remainder of the year. And then lastly, Aaron Jones, sprained MCL, which is what we had kind of talked about yesterday as well. My guess is he would be back after the bye week. It's usually a 1 to 2 week injury. They've got 2 games against Minnesota and LA before going on bye. My guess is they're going to give him all the time in the world, including that bye, and then see how he's doing coming off the bye week with a little extra rest. That would be my guess, but we will see. But overall, again, great news that this wasn't something worse for Jones and something that would maybe knock him out for the season. Just a couple weeks in all likelihood, and then Jones will likely be back after the bye week. Speaking of Aaron Jones in that running back position, of course, that leaves A.J. Dillon as the primary back and then Patrick Taylor as the backup. One move that kind of went under the radar, I think it was last week, but correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but the Packers signed Raquel Armstrong, a running back to the practice squad. I think there's a real opportunity that he could come up and be the number 3 back, and he kind of is a bit of a different runner than what you'd get from Patrick Taylor or A.J. Dillon. He could be a nice complement there. So don't be shocked if he potentially gets a call up, or, even if they don't sign him to the active roster, if he gets a call up on game day these next 2 weeks. And I wouldn't be shocked if they protected him either, so they could call him up. But he's a fun back, and I'm kind of interested and intrigued to see if he does get his chance with this offense, if he can do anything with it. And same thing with Patrick Taylor. So ultimately, this is going to be probably a lot of carries for A.J. Dillon, but you never know what other opportunity may arise for Patrick Taylor or maybe even a Raquel Armstrong. And I'm very, very excited to see just what may come of that moving forward for that running back position up until the point where Aaron Jones comes back. Speaking of the same thing with kind of edge rusher, of course, Preston Smith and Jonathan Garvin are the only remaining healthy edge rushers right now. So they're going to have to make a move in some way, shape, or form. They do have Tipa Naliai on the practice squad. That's a move they could make. Oren Burks played some edge rusher this past week. So that's another player that could potentially get some, or, could get some time at that position. And, otherwise they could look outside. They could bring Ladarius Hamilton back, who they cut a week ago. But they're going to probably have to make some move. Maybe Gary plays, and maybe they feel okay with Preston, Garvin, Gary, and Burks as their 4 outside linebackers. But I would expect them to try to do something with Whitney Mercilus out, Rashaan Gary banged up, Z still out. And yeah, I think that right now that's a position of potential weakness for Green Bay, especially if Gary is out. And I think it's something that they're going to have to address. Not sure what they're going to be able to find on maybe opposing teams' practice squads or on the street, but I think they're going to have to do everything in their power to try to shore up that position as best as possible until Gary and hopefully Z get back at some point, if that can still end up being the case. By the way, I said Raquel Armstrong. I meant Raquel Armstead. Had to look that up because I didn't think Armstrong sounded right as I was saying it, but Raquel Armstead, the running back. So sorry about that. My bad, but I do still think he can be a fun running back for Green Bay. Let's see what else. We got the stock sale coming up, so make sure if you are interested in that to check that out. Packers posted all the details. I'm not going to go through it here, but of course it is still fairly big Packer news, and it's going to help the organization moving forward. We could debate of whether or not this is actual stock or whatnot. It's still a cool gesture by Green Bay. Fans still love it, and it helps the team. So by all means, I'm all for it. No qualms about it. And then let's get into grades, because that's kind of the key thing that I wanted to get to. I think the really first thing that I wanted to go over with my grades for the defense this week is just very, very limited players who graded in the negative. And there were 4 players total who graded in the negative, but 3 of them were basically neutral grades. And that was Tyler Lancaster with a negative 0.05, literally the lowest negative grade you can get without being a neutral. Oren Burks with a negative 0.1, and I think Preston Smith with a negative 0.15. Like all 3 of them, by all means, basically just neutral grades. So the only real player who was in the negative this week of any real, or any real relevance, I guess, was Jonathan Garvin. And again, he continues to struggle at edge, which again, not great, knowing that Mercilus and Gary are banged up and Z is banged up right now. So, I think Green Bay's, again, going to have somebody step up at edge. They've had players step up everywhere else this season with injuries. And now with the potential issues at edge rusher, it's going to be time for Jonathan Garvin and Preston Smith to step up big. I think both of those guys have struggled a little bit the last handful of weeks. Certainly Garvin much more so than Smith, but they're going to need those guys. And especially against Minnesota, you want to get pressure on Kirk Cousins. Of course, you want to do the same to Matthew Stafford. So before the bye, 2 quarterbacks that maybe aren't top tier right now, but certainly can still beat you if you give them time. And that's the last thing you want to do, is give either of those guys times. If you're able to get to them and pressure them, you're going to be able to make them make mistakes and really make them uncomfortable. And we know with Stafford and Cousins what that means. So that's going to be paramount that Preston and Garvin step up big. But again, Garvin was really the only real negative this game. And it just goes to show, when you play their best defensive game of the season, which this rated certainly as my highest defensive grade for the season for the Packers and a shutout of the Seahawks, you're probably not going to have many negatives, and that was certainly the case this week. As far as the positives, number one on my list, Adrian Amos. I thought he actually struggled with a couple plays early in this game where he was just a little bit out of position. He missed a tackle early in the game, just some uncharacteristic stuff, and then just came on absolute gangbusters after that. Obviously, the huge interception, had a couple opportunities to make plays on the ball on the last drive, couldn't quite come down with interceptions, but still was in the right place, right time, and really had a chance or just made play on the ball, whether it was an interception or not. Was still made a really nice play. I just thought he had a really nice play. There's another play where I think Everett caught it and he was immediately there and wrapped up immediately. So Amos was one. Eric Stokes was two. I loved what I saw from Eric Stokes. And I mean loved what I saw from Eric Stokes. This was his best game technique-wise as a pro. And man, I could not be more impressed with where he is at as a rookie. That was some legit corner coverage skills in this game from Eric Stokes, where he's making speed turns and he's sticking with wide receivers. Was not as grabby. He was on balance. Man, that was very, very exciting. Like, that was me thinking that he could be a top corner in this league sort of tape. Again, I don't have anything else to say other than there's reason to be really excited. If he can continue to play like that in any way, shape, or form, any capacity, you have a lot to be excited about with Eric Stokes as a Packer fan. There are very few corners who have that type of tape as a rookie, and I really liked what I saw in this game against Seattle, against good wide receivers in Metcalf and against Tyler Lockett. Like, he was just on top of his game, and really, really excited what he's going to be able to do going forward. If he can stack that and continue to do that moving forward, man, if you could have Jair and Stokes as corners for the foreseeable future, I mean, man, that's a really tantalizing idea of those two corners playing on the outside with their speed, their athleticism, their ability to stick with wide receivers. They could make things a real pain for quarterbacks for a long time in the NFC. And then, oh, by the way, number three, another defensive back, Chandon Sullivan. Loved Sullivan in this game too. Yeah, he had the pass interference early in the game. Got a little bit grabby at the top, looked like he grabbed the arm, but other than that, I thought he had a really nice game. And you can see him becoming much more vocal too. You can just see the game has really, really slowed down for him this year. And I don't think that Sullivan's ever going to be a top tier slot guy in this league, but he's playing really good football right now, communicating better, understanding route concepts better, jumping plays, knowing where he's supposed to be. Really like where he is trending, and I just think he's a really solid football player. And of all the talk this year of who's going to play the cornerback positions and can Sullivan, he's been as steady as any defensive player the last month plus has been Chandon Sullivan in the slot. And, sometimes I think when you don't see players necessarily make plays, you think you don't think of them that much, but imagine, corners can be picked on pretty easily and can have really bad games really easily. We haven't seen that from Sullivan in a while, and knock on wood and everything else, but liked his tape again this week, and he's certainly trending in the right direction. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.